People Not Titles podcast is brought to you by Land Trust Title Services, your partners for results. Hello, this is Steve Kemp with the People Not Titles podcast, and I'm so excited today to have Leslie Grandy here. Leslie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Excellent. Leslie, as the founder of the advisory firm, The Product Guild, Leslie mentors and coaches CEOs and leaders to unlock their creative potential, to drive innovation, accelerate growth, and navigate the complexities of a fast-changing world. She's a former executive at Apple, Best Buy, and Discovery Communications, and she's led high-performance teams and driven transformation at the intersection of leadership, technology, and business development. Her book, which we're going to be talking about today, and I'm very excited, is Creative Velocity: Propelling Breakthrough Ideas in the Age of Generative AI. It provides a practical roadmap for leaders and organizations to break through creative barriers, drive innovation, and stay competitive in an AI-driven world. So, Leslie, how exciting is that? What a wonderful career you've had, and I'm so excited to talk about this book.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's great timing. The book shipped this week. So I'm really excited to be, I'm really excited to be here talking about it.
Well, we're honored and privileged to have an advanced copy, and I did read through it, and it really resonated with me. And we have a fairly large title company with a lot of these different management things that you address in this book, and so the book was really timely for me. So thank you for that.
Oh, great! I'm always happy to hear it has applicability to people in different fields, and you're definitely in a different field than I am. So it's really wonderful to hear that you found something that resonated in the book.
Yeah, and Leslie, and I would say that I found more than something. There was the whole way that you laid out the book. There's your narrative and kind of like the teaching time. And then there's this time of where you interview a subject matter expert that is highly qualified to speak on these things from their diverse angle. So I feel like I'm getting books within books here in that regard. And then to really sink it home, you have these great exercises at the end of every chapter. So maybe just talk a little bit about what your thought was in setting it up that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I started to do it, I almost had it in my mind as a puzzle that was ordered differently. I had put chapters in different orders, and the interviews were happening as I was writing the book. And so the material was coming in from the interviews that I had to weave into the story I was trying to tell. So it really was an active assemblage of all that content. I always knew I needed the exercises to make it practical for people to practice and to give them a way to understand how to think about that technique in a personally relevant situation. And so I wanted the exercises to be personally something somebody could do at any time and come back to practice. But the interviews were really an interesting thread through it. Everybody I interviewed had personally influenced me on my journey as a leader, and really had different things to add to that story that I told before the interview.
Yes.
And one thing that I found after I completed the interviews was there were so many common threads across this diverse group of accomplished people, that you had people in startups, you had people in large companies, people who were in different parts of the technology field, some that weren't even in technology really. And in that sense, I think that also gave the audience someone to relate to, someone to look up to. So maybe you're not a startup person, maybe you are a big company person. Well, there were people that I interviewed from large companies. So I wanted there to be diversity, but it also was reflective of my own journey.
Yeah, and I thought you're right. They all had a thread of the same mindset in many ways, but there were nuances that I think had you be able, if you're an extrovert and introvert, if you're a strategic or if you're an ideator or whatever it is, there's ways to really grab on and say, I get the idea. So you come at the same idea from multiple angles, which I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, I didn't know what I was going to get in the interviews.
Yes.
So it was a little bit of a risk I did keep the questions mostly similar between them. So there could be a
Yes.
thread, but I wasn't really sure whether the answers would provide that thread. And what was really, I think, the commonality across everybody I interviewed was their self-awareness. I
Mm,
think one thing that's really critical for people to be successful as creative thinkers is to be aware of what your
yes.
triggers are. How do you get
Yeah.
into a flow state? What inspires you? What are the things you do when you're stuck? And I think being able to put your finger on what those things are really helps people when they find themselves stuck. And I
Absolutely.
think that part of it was pretty much consistent across everyone I interviewed. They were self-aware, very reflective. And the other thing that I think everyone was resilient. They all talk about failure as a part of the process of being creative and not as a end or a collapse of a good idea. They,
Absolutely. That
I think
was
that was really imperative that message got out.
absolutely. So you talk about, excuse me, you talk about some attributes that are crucial. And I think that some people might stop right there and go, okay, I have work to do just to get myself in the place to be in the creative velocity zone. You talk about openness and willingness to consider new ideas, discernment, flexibility, curiosity, resilience is what you talked about, reflection, equanimity. How'd you distill it down to those really seven, yeah, those seven, yeah, 7 points? Is that just something that you noticed in people, or is that something that you consider to be absolutes that you have to have these or develop these over time to really maximize?
It's a really great question because I think a lot of people know an open mindset, one that would be curious, is helpful, right, for so
Yes.
many things. But I think an open mindset doesn't necessarily address the actionability of an
Mm,
idea, the realization or the capacity to realize an idea and take the risk that that idea may be breaking new ground and may trigger things you didn't expect when that idea lands in an audience. And I
hmm.
think that's the really imperative part was these additional things. I know an open mindset includes emotional intelligence, but what I really want to stress is the equanimity, the balance of emotion, the idea
Mm,
that your emotional control is what allows you to see things. Because if you get whipsawed by your emotions, more likely than not, you're going to miss things. You're going to try to get out of that emotional state the fastest way you can, perhaps. And that
hmm.
may not lead you to the best solution. So being able to be balanced is a nuance that I thought was really critical and something that I heard from a lot of the people that I interviewed, that the ability not to be reactive was more
Yes.
important than just having the emotional intelligence to deal with people in an open way. And so that idea that if you're panicked or you're stressed, you're less likely to come up with a creative solution, or others around you are less likely to be helpful in coming up with a creative solution because they're dealing with your emotion. And that was something that I realized a lot of the people that I had interviewed and had coached me through my career were that way. They weren't,
Yes.
hair on fire people. They weren't people that threw things when they were angry. They were very controlled and managed in how they reacted to things to allow for the space to come up with a fresh idea or some solution to an unconventional problem.
That's great. Yeah, I wrote in the equanimity that there's an evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. And I think that to reach that point, there's a point of maturity for people, but you have to be tested, right? And maybe you don't react the right way, but eventually by being tested and then having that experience through the testing to come through it, you start to see, okay, this is a test again. I don't have to get freaked out about it and that kind of thing. So that's huge. And I think it can separate people and limit people if they don't have that under control.
Absolutely. My personal story of this, and the thing I think about the book that I was aiming for was to hit both personal and professional creativity,
Absolutely.
right? Because in your personal life, you have a car accident that you didn't expect, and you could get all down in the mouth about that, and what am I going to do? And oh, woe is me. Or you can go fix the problem, right? You can go think
Yes.
about what do I have to do to get out of this situation and not feel the self pity that I was in an accident I didn't create, right? So
Mhm.
a great example for me personally was I have a tension set engagement ring where the diamond is not held into the setting except by the tension of the ring. And I've had
Mm,
it for over 25 years. And I was putting my laundry away. And when I looked at my hand and the diamond had fallen out.
wow.
And I typically would have panicked and freaked out. And I would have, called my husband, come help me find it. And I really felt like, having written the book and having thought about how important it was for me to stay calm, I thought, all right, let's backtrack and think of all the places it could have fallen out, because it's tension set. So there had to be something that triggered it. And sure
Yes.
enough, I opened the drawer and it was sitting on top of my clothes that I had just put away.
Wow.
And because I came downstairs and I said to my husband, you'll never believe this. The diamond came out of my ring. He said, oh, great. Now we can buy you a bigger one. He didn't have to deal with my craziness, right? He didn't have to spend this time, you know, freaking out about my freaking out, right? He was
Yes.
very happy I found it and saw the positive in the situation because I let him deal with the outcome, not with the
Mm,
emotion. And
well, that's great.
I think that example is a really, a solid but simple premise of take the problem, take it apart, look at it as best you can, and then bring what you've done to someone else to help take it to the next level. And I think that's what equanimity is, that's different than really just emotional intelligence in an open mindset. It's really part of the problem solving exercise.
Yeah, I love it. And a lot of times, you think of someone who's reading their book and they're a business go-getter or whatever, but this is really applicable to all areas of your life, including just doing stuff at home and having, because, you want to try to be as holistic as a person. The person you're at home is the person at work, is the person at play. And all of a sudden, you're now much more balanced in that way.
Absolutely. And I think it brings out the creativity in those around you as much as it helps you, right, solve problems with that balanced thought process that gives space for some solution you hadn't thought of. And I
Hmm.
think in both scenarios, whether it's at work or whether it's in your personal life, the same things hold true. There's people around you who may help you or may run from you, depending upon how you react, right? And how
Absolutely.
resilient you show yourself to be under that duress.
Yeah. So Leslie, you start out the book by talking about MacGyver, and you talk with the actual writers and producers of MacGyver. What had you latch on to MacGyver as kind of the opening, which was very compelling?
Well, first of all, when I originally wrote the first draft, it was not the first chapter. And when the whole book finished, I thought, oh my gosh, I have to start with this because their interview is just so energizing and exciting,
Absolutely.
right? Their interview was
Yeah.
just amazing. And the writers, I've known these guys for over 20 years. I've known them probably, I want to say, going on 30 years, and they're just so talented. And when I
Hmm.
gave them the assignment, they wanted to write their answers. Most of the people allowed me to video the interview and then use the transcript so that we could stay engaged. But they're writers; they didn't want to do that, and so they're like,
Yeah.
"We'll write the answers out." And they each took 5 questions. I gave everyone 10, but only 5 made it in the book. In any event, they misunderstood the assignment, and instead of writing 200 words per question, they wrote 2,000 words per question.
Wow. You had a lot of material to sift
I had
through.
so much material, and when I saw that, I said, "Oh, this has got to be the foot I start on." It's so educational at the same time as it's entertaining, which is what I really wanted the book to be, both of those things.
Yes.
And I think they were just normal everyday screenwriters, but they were tasked with inventing the MacGyverism. And
Yeah.
how would you be that person that actually acts like MacGyver as a writer when that's not your job as a writer, right? To solve every problem that anybody could invent, right?
Yes.
And so the
Yes.
fact that these guys took it on and how they approach thinking about it and what they learned from the process of creating hundreds of MacGyverisms was really, I think, super compelling. And it did really make the right first step to get people into the book because it's a pop culture reference that everyone understands, but nobody really gets what you have to do to think like MacGyver. How do you think
Yeah.
like that? And so I thought that would open the door to all sorts of readers.
Yeah, and to think like the creator of MacGyver is like PhD level MacGyver in many ways. And I like one of the things that resonated with me, and I feel it in my own life too, is a lot of times we wait for that flash of brilliance to come into our lives, and it doesn't come until we get into the work actually, and all of a sudden it's like boom, something, so you're starting to engage, and then that help or that great idea comes as opposed to the great idea coming first.
Yeah, a lot of times, to your point, people get stuck on the constraint. So they can't kind of get out of the gate. I think
Yes.
that people think that constraints are the enemy of creativity. And you saw in a number of interviews, starting with the MacGyver one, that constraints are actually a catalyst for creative
Yeah, it's the
thinking.
beginning of creativity is how you're locked in. How do I get out of this?
Right. And not only that, what happens when I don't have everything I need? Do I
Yes.
stop? Do I do nothing? Do I wait for
Yes.
everything to come? And
Yes.
I think in that scenario, starting with MacGyver was really a subtle hint to just saying, let go of everything you already think, because it's probably the most limiting factor in problem solving. Because if you look around you and look at everything that you have, not what you don't have, maybe there's a way that you get from A to B differently than you had ever done it before. And so I
Absolutely.
think that really unlocked a lot of the rest of the conversation, which is you think you know how to be creative, but really, could you MacGyver something? Could you think
Hmm.
about MacGyver in that particular way? And could you actually give MacGyver feedback to someone saying, what are the things that we really need to get to that place where we can kind of find a way to the next step, even if that isn't the full solution? Maybe
Hmm.
it's the first step in many steps down a road I wouldn't have taken. And I think
Yes.
that's the most compelling part of it all, is that you may open the door to something that you wouldn't have considered just because you have the constraint.
And you shift kind of to this idea that there really are no new ideas. And I was fascinated by the part in the book where you talk about Steve Jobs actually feeling guilty that he really didn't feel like he had any new ideas. He just kind of put some stuff together. And I thought that that's a lot like how life is. And sometimes we almost feel like we're plagiarizing because we're taking useful things in our existence and putting them together to create this new idea. It doesn't have to be something so wild and crazy that only new works. It can be the existing put together in a different way that works.
And that combination is the new, right?
Is the new, yeah.
It is the new. And
Hmm.
one of the things I thought was fascinating when I was researching the book was that uh like I think it was 70% of all patents from, the late 1700s to 2010 were actually the combination of other patents. That
Wow.
people always build on top of what is known. And that
Hmm.
the real idea here is that you could combine something to
Hmm.
get something entirely new, or how you choose to make it possible for someone to do something could be so inventive that people just gravitate to it. Steve Jobs didn't invent the MP3 player, but boy, that iPod iTunes ecosystem was a real game changer. And
Right. And
combining that music store with the player and putting it on
absolutely.
both Windows and Mac machines really just changed the entire competitive landscape for everyone who was making MP3 players.
Yeah, and most novices, most people with that iPod have no idea who invented the MP3. They think Jobs did.
That's the point. And I think when you land the plane that well, right, even on the top of somebody else's original invention, I think at that point, people really see the new in that additive invention, where you take the digital music store and the hardware, and now you combine them into an ecosystem. Who was using the word ecosystem around music in the MP3 player days, right? But now
Absolutely.
all of a sudden, I'm looking at it differently, so I provide a different set of services to support it.
That's great. In thinking about, so I was also really taken aback on how hopeful everyone was about AI and how there is a place for human creativity. That common thread throughout was that this is not going to replace humanity as long as we remain creative and as long as we're bringing emotion into it, into our passions and our work. Those are two things that AI it can't necessarily compete with.
Yeah, I think there's things like humor that we know AI struggles with uh, double entendres and sarcasm,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
There are cultural nuances of something that I might think is funny, but somebody in another country on another continent might think is just stupid or not even
Hmm.
amusing.
Yes.
And I think the idea that lived experiences also inform how we react to things, whether it's art or business, right? We react based on how we experience things. That lived experience is unique to every person. And that
Absolutely.
And that part of it, while it can be captured in data, or we can train AI to understand certain things about those experiences, the vocabulary of our language is also very confusing. I could use something and say that it's right, and it means it's correct, or it's the opposite of left. And
Yes.
so we have to sort of take the lead and show our creative agency in these interactions and own the outcome by making those discernments around, okay, that's funny, that's not funny, that's relevant, that's resonant. And then in that, improve, iterate, build upon
Yes.
that with a partner. And I think a lot of people sort of see the AI piece as a threat, either a replacement to my job or a software to use to get a job done. And what I'm
Hmm.
really trying to put out there is, this is your creative catalyst. This is your partner. This is the one that's going to not judge you when you come up with a stupid idea, and is going to come up with 100 stupid ideas as well that you can judge. But the
Hmm.
idea here is that you can see things faster. It can reach data that you can't reach at lightning speed. It can find patterns that are really hard for the human mind to see across domains, like the relationship to biomechanics and basketball shoes, which is
Yes.
an example I had in the book, where the folks
Yes.
from Reebok looked at how fleas are able to jump 10 times their height in order to improve the pump basketball sneaker. Right? The
Yes.
idea that AI now can help you find those things faster and then bring them back to you, and then you can apply them to what your problem is based on its relevance or meaning, which you ascribe to the idea.
Hmm.
Now it's a collaboration, and it's a partnership as opposed to a replacement or an automation tool.
Yes. And your interview with Tony, is it Fidel?
Yep.
Yeah, Tony Fidel. I thought it was great because this is true. We really value partnerships in our business. And what he said was that we can create things through AI, but only you can meaningfully understand your customers, the problems they face, the solutions that you can offer, and whether they'll work. And I thought that that was really powerful, that we have the knowledge of our customer base or who we're selling to or whatever it is. And that provided that kind of hope for anyone in kind of a business growth model, that the better you know your customer, the more useful AI will be to you.
And the more useful you will be to your company, because
100%, yes.
you will be directing AI towards the value. And I think
Hmm.
AI doesn't really know what the thing is your customers value, or even what you as a human value in your personal life, what matters to you.
Yes.
And so if I were going to plan a travel itinerary, it could plan a travel itinerary, but it wouldn't know what things I like to do unless I told it, well, for me to really enjoy this trip, I want to make sure I include a visit to a historic church, or an opportunity to take a scenic run when I get to that city. And so
Hmm.
I have to inform it in order for it to see purpose and meaning.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it's just an itinerary anyone could do, and therefore it's really not adding additional value to my Google search.
Yes. So I'm a big, I love analogies, Leslie. I use them all the
Me
time in our
too.
business. And
Me too.
I need to get, and I never thought of leveraging AI to create better analogies, but I'm certainly going to be doing that. But you dedicate a whole chapter to the power of analogies. Talk about that in terms of the way that we communicate our value proposition to our folks.
Yeah, it's funny you said that, because that's who I am too. And anybody who's ever reported me would tell you, oh, she uses
Yeah, here's
analogies
another
all the time.
analogy. Yeah.
But I do feel the reason we keep doing it, at least for me, maybe it's not the same for you, Steve, but for me, I do it because I think it puts someone's head into a different space.
Mm.
It takes them out of the problem space they're in and looks at the features of another situation to see what they can learn from it and apply. And a really
Hmm.
good example was, I was working with someone on a marketplace scenario, and it was really concerning to them that they might try things that would degrade the brand. And so they didn't really want to release them on the marketplace if they didn't really know how much everyone was going to love it. And I said, well, that's just silly. Go place a little corner of the website up in the nav bar that says, the beta zone or something. And then everyone who clicks on it will know they went to some place that isn't the same. And the
Yes.
analogy that I used is, if you ever shopped at Anthropologie, which you probably haven't, but maybe women in your life have, It's a highly curated store, a very experiential store, very much designed intentionally. But the sale room looks like worse than Filene's basement. And the
Wow.
people that go there know when they're going there, they're working hard to find the deal, but it's all the stuff that used to be on the floor. So they're motivated to do it because it's at a
Mm.
better price. And maybe they'll have a find where it's the only thing that's like it in that store. But still, it's the adventure shopper who likes the Anthropology brand, but is okay not having this designer experience and paying full price for it. They want the clothes at a more affordable price. And so they'll go into this room and they know exactly it's not curated. It's things are kind of thrown on shelves. It doesn't
Yeah.
look at all like the store. But I've given myself permission to have a different experience because I want the Anthropology curated collection, even in a place that looks a little bit like a discount basement. And so if
Yeah.
you tell somebody, hey,
I
it's
love
our
it.
stuff, but you're going in a place that's not like the rest of the stuff, you're giving the customer permission to understand it's going to be different. And so I
Yes.
use that analogy to say
I
it's a
love it.
retail store and they have a brand they're trying to protect, but look how they pulled that off. And
Hmm.
so I think sometimes you need to get someone into a different headspace, and analogies help you see not only the commonalities, but the opportunities.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then you interview Denny Post. Denny's a female, right?
Yeah,
Now is she the CEO of Red Robin?
she was. I met her originally. She was the chief marketing officer at T-Mobile when I worked at T-Mobile. And then when
Mhm.
she moved to Red Robin, she brought me on to be a part of an innovation council that she had created. She is now just a board member. She has an incredible portfolio of board roles that she had, but she was so um, instrumental in my understanding how to bring innovation into a business that I really had no experience in, which was
Yes.
obviously restaurants and hospitality.
Yeah, and talking about Denny, so first off, you begin the book by kind of implying that creativity is like kind of like a pump that needs to be primed, and as you prime it and release some of the current ideas, it makes room for the new ideas. And she talked about that creativity favors the brave.
I
And
love
why,
that
yeah,
phrase. I love that. It's one of my favorite quotes out of it because I think she just nailed it with that one.
yeah, I agree. And and so there's a feeling when we're creating
Hey,
of
thanks for
risk.
listening to the People Not Titles podcast. We are brought to you by our great sponsors, Land Trust Title Services, your partners for
Creating
results.
of riskiness. And I think we have to, as creators, we have to kind of get comfortable with that feeling, don't we?
Yeah, I think it's two things. It's the ambiguity that
Yes.
really sits around those moments of creative thinking and creative problem solving, right? It's well, if it was obvious to everybody, you don't need creative problem solving, but it's usually not that obvious, and that's usually some amount of ambiguity. Like, how is
Hmm.
this going to work, or is this going to work, or will anyone care? Kind of moments that I solved this problem. So I think the ambiguity is something that a lot of people personally struggle with, right?
Yes.
Being in a place where they don't have a ready answer or a path to a ready answer. And one of the reasons I think she and I hit it off so well and why we had such good history is my first career was in the film industry. And in the film industry, that became my creative superpower. It's not caring that I'd never done it before because every single problem I was given, I'd never done before. I was a
Yes.
20-year-old. I didn't know how to book a aircraft carrier for a Kleenex commercial. Like, what experience did I have for that?
Right. Right.
But nothing that I was given did I believe I couldn't figure out, even if I didn't
Hmm.
know how I would. And so I think there's a lot of people who struggle with that creative self confidence that they can figure it out. So it takes some bravery to believe in your own capacity to solve a problem you've never seen before and to live in that ambiguity and perhaps make a couple of misses before you hit the win. And I think those moments where, okay, that didn't work, and okay, that didn't work, scares people. That
Yes.
people think that's
Yes.
risky. So
Right.
between the ambiguity and the risk of failure and the lack of confidence, it's all it takes is bravery. What else
Yes.
could you use to get over those three things?
Yeah, and I think it was great to hear that one of the ways that Denny kind of mitigates the the scariness of it or the fear of it and fosters bravery is that she really believes in working in her strengths. and
Yeah.
working in things that she's good at, even though you're doing new experiences and trying them in new, different scenarios, you're still knowing yourself well enough. Like you go back to the self-awareness and you say, listen, no, I'm strategic. This is part of what they got me here for. So I'm going to exercise that, but be creative in it.
Yeah, there's some tests that were done that were developed for understanding your creative problem solving profile. There are some people that are just better at solving implementation problems, or some people are better at concepting from an
Yes.
idea. And
Yes.
and there's two things you can do if you're one of those people that's kind of stuck in one of those profiles. A, you can train yourself to learn how to do things that may make you successful in the other profiles, or you hire people who are good
Yes.
in those profiles so that they
Yes.
complement your own tendencies and your own biases by bringing what they do to the table. And a lot of times what companies do is they hire people like themselves, and so they have a room full of implementers or a room full of ideators and nobody to implement. Or what
Yes.
happens when we want to optimize it before we scale it? Who are the people who are going to understand how to go into optimization mode? Not the ideators. They don't like
Hmm.
that state. So either you get people who are good at all of those types of profiles, or you train yourself through these techniques to get better at the ones you're not naturally likely to use.
Yes. Leslie, so I'm a soccer coach on my that's my evening job, and I've spent most of my life, and now for the last 5 years coaching kids that are a higher level teenagers. And then I've gone back to, I have a grandson that's 4, and so now I'm teaching them, and they're like, what are these white lines on the field? I mean, we're literally going back to the basics. And I breakthrough the other night after reading your book by saying, listen, I just said to everyone, guys, don't be afraid to make a mistake. And so I think part of this whole creative bravery is the culture we set in our organizations to say, hey, mistakes are okay, as opposed to why wasn't everyone perfect on the first iteration?
Absolutely. And I think Jules in her interview, one of the other along the same line, the same
Yes.
theme, where she's like, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? I've protected
Yes.
my financial situation and I'll start another business if this one doesn't work. What's the worst that I can imagine failure looking like? Well, failure to me would be losing everything I own. So I'll
Yes.
protect against that. And
Right.
so that reduces my risk, but I'm okay with the idea that the business might not work until I get into
Yes.
it and figure it out. So the idea of also separating out what defines failure for people, because if you think of failure as the end of the cul-de-sac, you're never going to
Hmm.
learn from it. But if you
Hmm.
think of a mistake as a tool to learn along the way how to make something better, or how to pivot from something that really isn't as good as you thought it was, and being open and resilient enough to do that, then you're maybe more likely to find something that is interesting that you didn't expect when you set out on that initial path that turned out not to work out as well as you thought.
Yeah, and Jules actually took it to the next level and said, what if those failures are just revealing a glitch in your system that you need to see to be able to correct? And I thought that's perfect too. Every person's failure in our organization could actually be a telltale of what we can improve in the whole process, as opposed to they failed. It's something that we might need to change systemic.
Absolutely. I think uh, you stay away from claiming those mistakes or failures because you feel like it's going to paint you badly in
Yes.
the light of your work environment if you own them. But I think anybody who doesn't own their mistakes has a different issue, right? Because at that point, they're not looking at the picture with that real lens that says, what did I learn from making that mistake? And
Yeah.
why would I have made that mistake? And what could I do to avoid that mistake? And by the way, did I learn anything that actually informs my next move? And
Mm.
so if you run from the failure, you're never going to have that conversation with yourself.
Yeah, and so in that kind of, in the failure idea, either you haven't tried anything if you haven't failed, or you haven't owned it. I mean, there's one of the two
Yep.
buckets, right? Because if you've
Right.
tried stuff and been a little bit close to that line, you're going to wind up failing. Um, Leslie, I thought it was really neat that every single person gave a perspective about what they do to either get into the flow, or what they do when they just are like totally pressed. And
Right.
there was a lot of great ideas. So maybe share just a little bit about the kind of the idea of the flow state.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really learned a lot about the flow state through Jason Silva, who I had
Yes.
interviewed for the book. And he was actually a personality on a digital channel that Discovery Communications was providing. And so that's where I came across him. And I found that I actually embraced the idea that it's a state I can actually own, that I can actually do, as opposed to it happens and I don't note that it happens, or that
Yes.
I'm in it and I don't take advantage of it. And
Hmm.
so one of the things I think that I really appreciated about what he said about flow was, for him, he can't get into a flow state if he's task oriented. So he
Mm.
divides his day into a morning where he spends on all the emails and tasks he has to do, because that side of his brain is very much about lists and accomplishments and moving the ball forward.
And kind
But
of
he knows that,
freeing up his head so that he can get into the, as opposed to, I
yep,
got all these things to do and they keep nagging at me.
it's most people meeting, email, and then all of a sudden it's 6 o'clock and they have to make dinner or they
Totally.
have to go pick
Yes.
up their kids. He actually creates intentional space,
That's
that if
great.
you get an email from him, it will not be after 12 o'clock his time.
Mm.
He will catch up on all his emails because that's all he'll focus on in the morning. But in the afternoon, this is when he takes the measures to inspire himself. And in his role as sort of a thought leader and an author and a speaker, he really needs that juice, right? That
Hmm.
energy boost. And
Hmm.
so what he'll do is explore some part of nature, or
Yes.
find himself in a new environment where he has to figure out how to navigate it. And
Yes.
maybe that's a new city that he's landed in or someplace, but he makes a point of making space to give
Yeah.
himself the opportunity to lose track of time. But when we're in a regular business day, losing track of time is just not an option. And so we
Hmm.
don't create the space for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think to a person, every one of them, their main strategy to do better work was stepping away from the work, which is kind of
Totally.
counterintuitive. So is getting away, going for a walk, taking a breather, meditation, just taking my mind off the work so that I can re-energize. And I thought that that was really powerful. I thought too that there seemed to be a common theme to the power of getting good sleep and
Oh,
how
totally.
that was just like, wow, like, if you can look back to your sleep schedule and go back to your whole, lack of creativity or your ability to create.
That was a really personal revelation for me. I
Yeah.
want to say about years ago. I thought I was being more productive because I was a night owl and I was staying
Mm.
up and I was getting work done while the house was quiet and everyone was sleeping. And I just was so proud of myself at how I could burn the candle at both ends and only needed 5 or 6 hours of sleep, until I realized that it was absolutely a self-made scenario where, by keeping the lights on and doing work, I was making myself a night owl. That was the first
Mm.
aha. The
Yes.
second part of it is, if that's the last thing I do before I go to bed, it's likely to be the thing that's in my head when I go to sleep. And so
Hmm.
my head spins on the ideas that I had, doesn't freeform across a bunch of other things to connect the dots when I sleep, because I'm really, really connected to the last thought I had before
Mm.
I shut it down. And that may be a problem I just can't solve, which keeps me up at night. The
Hmm.
other part of it too was, I realized that it builds up over time. For me personally, I noticed my emotional balance suffers with lack of
Yes.
sleep. My
Yes.
ability to handle catastrophes or to manage the unexpected went down significantly the less quality sleep I had. Not just the duration of it, but the quality of the sleep, the restfulness of my brain. And so I
Yes.
started a sleep meditation protocol. It's literally the only New Year's Eve resolution I have ever kept in my entire life.
Wow. Good for you.
And I took a job at Amazon and I thought, the only way I'm ever going to survive this is to try this, because if I don't
Mm.
get sleep, I won't have the power to take on a stressful day. And so I downloaded Calm and Insight Timer and Headspace, and I started listening to sleep stories as my first thing, which is just like adults getting books read to them, but they're
Yes.
visualization, right? They're very visual, and the story really is scene setting. So allowing you to place yourself in a campfire or a walk by the river or all these, peaceful locations that allow you
Yes.
to visualize something. So I thought that was wonderful. And then I went into breathing exercises, and the breathing
Mm.
exercises were also super helpful because they create a state for your heart where it actually stops the rate of your heart in a way that is conducive to sleep. And
Mm.
so this combination of breathing exercises, which I was also able to use during the day, if I had to get up on stage at an Amazon conference, I just defaulted back to the breathing
That's
exercises because I
great.
knew that they managed my heart rate. But then sometimes I just didn't even want to focus on breathing. I just wanted to see myself sitting by a babbling brook or
Mm.
walking through a park. And
Mm.
these visualizations are also very relaxing. But what they do, which is really surprising, which is why I stuck with it, I think, is they free your mind up to wander as you're going to sleep. And that
Mm.
mind wandering is where the unconscious mind and the conscious mind meet and ideas can sort of start to fertilize. And so
Yes.
while you're in that state and you're focused on this visualization, you're able to connect the dots to things that just you wouldn't have otherwise trying to work yourself to sleep after staying up, till 2 o'clock in the morning. So for me, both the breathing and the visualization was really game changing. And the more I
Yes.
studied, the more I realized that's a thing. It's a
Yeah.
scientific thing that the quality of your sleep is almost as important or more important in some cases than the duration of your sleep.
That's powerful. And then you have towards the end of the book, you have this idea of going and playing. And a lot of times you see these big jet setters, right? And it seems like they're always messing around more than they're working, right? They're hella skiing or they're fishing or whatever it is. But really, it is part of their process to bring their best self to their business even. And so there's a tell in there. And I think a lot of people look at it and go, oh, if I work 17-hour days for 30 years, and then eventually I could be like Richard Branson or whoever who actually gets to play. And they don't necessarily connect that. Actually, the playing was there the whole time. So talk a little bit about the
Exactly.
power of playing.
Yeah, I think as adults we do get too rigorous in our schedule and our time
Mm.
is blocked and play seems a little frivolous. And maybe people do board game play and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think in business a lot of times people thought, "Oh, we'll put a ping pong table in the office and then people can play."
Yeah.
But you're still in that environment, you're still with coworkers, you're still on guard
You got your
around your
boss walking by going, what's everyone doing playing ping pong, you know?
right. It's not the same. I think the thing that really I appreciate about play, and I got this again from some of the people that I spoke to, is that it's a refreshing moment for your brain.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
takes enough effort that your brain is focused, but it also can create the flow state because it doesn't require all of your brain. Now, maybe heli-skiing does, but for a
Hmm.
lot of other people, just swimming is a great
Yeah.
way, right, to let your mind wander while you're doing something that's got really no purpose. You're not swimming to someplace, right? You're just swimming for the exercise of it, but you're also refreshing yourself without
Yes.
any dictator rules around how you do it. Oh, I'll do a
Yeah.
breaststroke. Oh, I'll do a backstroke. Oh, I'll stop for a little bit, right? Your brain takes that moment to say, I know what I'm doing. I know how to keep you breathing in the water and what you have to do and how much speed you need to stay afloat. But at the same time, it's not fully using your conscious brain. And that moment where you're allowing yourself that playfulness of, this is what I feel like doing, you give yourself permission to give some of the brain over to something else, to some
Yeah.
other thing. And it could be, just playing with your dog in the park, in an off leash park. But in that moment, you're making sure the dog's okay. It's not getting in a fight with another dog. You're looking for
Yeah.
things that might be coming at you. But you're not, solving world hunger. And
Yeah.
so your brain has enough capacity to think about other things besides the moment where you're letting go of the actual thing that's not in front of you because you have to pay attention to your kids at the playground or you have to pay attention to your dog at the off leash park. But it's enough of an attention that you're able to free up some of your brain. And that playfulness, that idea that that's good time spent, I don't
Mm.
think as humans we do that. We give ourselves credit for that. I think we're
Yeah.
harder on ourselves when we spend an hour doing something that doesn't look productive.
Yes, I agree with you. I think high achievers really struggle with the balance and you wind up with burnout, or then you have escapism type things that, kind of acceptable escapism that, whether it be going out for drinks or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and as opposed to just kind of healthy play as part of your process.
Yeah,
Um,
Pat was talking about doodling as his version of this,
yes,
right? And
yes,
he said that's just the perfect way because it has no purpose and it has no
yeah,
intention and it has no rules and there's no guidelines. But when he does it, he knows he's left his other part of his brain to wander. And I
hmm
thought that's very playful. People who doodle, right, are actually activating that playful side of their brain.
yeah. And it's interesting. Scott Belsky, Scott talked about in your part of Spin the Story, which is being, trying to be a good storyteller or really getting good with stories because they connect with people much like the analogies do. I think is excellent. And he talks about the idea of, polishing, getting the golden polish on an idea and not necessarily like stopping and, when he's on a run, not necessarily writing it down and, oh my gosh, it's a brilliant idea, I'm going to lose it, but just letting that idea marinate in the activity that is not necessarily work related.
Totally. And Jay Samit said the same thing where he gets up in the middle of the night thinking of ideas for what his art is going to be. And he knows he's not filtering it out. And he waits until he goes back to sleep and gets up later to see if anything still sounded interesting. So to
Hmm
him, he actually makes a point of getting up during the night when his brain is still a little foggy, because in that space of letting go of the actual activities of the day, he can sort of explore ideas and just throw a bunch of them out there and see what stands up later in the light of day. The idea
Yeah.
that you can walk away from the idea and if it's still good, it'll be there a couple hours later, or marinating in it to decide whether it actually takes you where you want to go, and then putting it down and seeing if it's still. Tony said the same thing, right? Something
hmm
sounded like a good idea, but sometimes you have to walk away and see if it still eats at you.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other, someone else, let me see here. I forget who said it, but this idea of, it was Scott, Early.
Early.
Yeah. Scott said, every good idea is a good idea, and I love this because I'm very much will someone buy this? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because that's when the good idea crosses over to a real idea is when someone says yes and actually is willing to pay money for it or buy into it in whatever way it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, this is where AI and human creativity really have to come together, because AI can come up with 100 ideas that are all not valuable to anyone, that have no
Yes.
meaning and no one would
Yeah.
pay for,
Yeah.
right? But it's up to us to really assess whether that idea has value. And if that value is big enough for us to pursue, even personally, is this
Yes.
opportunity, is the value that I think on the other side looks like it's worth pursuing. Maybe as I get into it, I see it's not what I thought it was. But
Yeah.
the idea that we're expressing the idea in itself isn't enough, right?
Yeah.
That the idea has to materialize into some purpose or value for someone for it to be a creative and good idea. And that's, again, where that discernment we talked about earlier and where AI just is there. It has no judgment, so it doesn't know a good idea from a bad idea.
Absolutely. And Pat talks about, which I thought was Pat Copeland talks about, which, I suffered from hanging on to failing way too late in the game, as opposed to, if you're going to fail, you'd rather have early failure as opposed to failure late, kind of missing all the warning signs and then being so vested in that you think the only way out is to push harder and try harder as opposed to totally back away.
Yeah, it's the brute force version of creativity, which never works, right? That
Yes.
brute, I'm going to just push it to the end, and it'll be good when I get to the end, even though I see all of these signals along the way. It'll be different when I get to the end. Getting to the
Yes.
end will make it a better idea. And I think
Mhm.
we get latched onto an idea because we need the idea. We need the way to
Mhm.
get to the end, but we're not willing to say this was not the path to use to get there. And I think that takes a creative mind to let go of an idea as much as it does to come up with one, because at that moment, if it doesn't have intention, purpose, meaning, and value, why do it? Right?
Yes.
Why do it? And I think at some point you may find that it has none of those things, but it may be way late down. You still should bail. Just because
Yeah.
you're another 50 yards to the finish line doesn't mean you should get to the finish line. It doesn't
Yes.
mean that makes it a good idea.
Yeah. Well, Leslie, and it's one thing for each of us individually to grab onto these concepts and exercise them, and it's another thing to pass them down to our team. And I think that through your exercise, I've done these group exercises with the team, and they're risky, right? Because you got some people that are quiet or don't want to engage or whatever it is. But every time I've done a group exercise, we've connected better together. We've fought through some of the awkwardness of it, and we've elevated the team. So talk a little bit about the idea of the exercises, and they're not just like suggestions, but they're vital kind of ingraining these into our teams.
Well, thanks for calling it out, because I think one of the things the exercises are really intended to do is to get people to realize there isn't always a right answer, and that exercising judgment prematurely can actually kill creativity. And so a lot of times what people do is they think they're going to go do these answers to get the right answer. And some of the puzzles do have an answer, but the idea is the process. How did you get to the answer? What is the process you use to get to the answer? There's a logic puzzle in there. This is a really great example of the AI component too. There's a logic puzzle in there where I listed a bunch of facts, and then the question is, who lives in the red house, or which house does the dog live in, or something. And I thought, oh, I'm writing this puzzle. If I was a reader, I might give it to AI and see what AI came up with and compare my result to AI, or I might just give it to AI and see what I can learn from it. So I thought, oh, before I publish a book, I should see what would happen if somebody did that. So I put the puzzle into AI, and it came back with an answer. It just chose to ignore 3 of the facts. So it wasn't the right answer, because I wrote the puzzle. I knew what the answer was. So I said, why did you ignore these 3 facts? That's not using all the material. Oh, you're right. Let me run it again. And the next time it ran it, it ignored 2 different facts. It took the other 3 back in, but it just booted 2 as being trivial and not relevant. And I was like, that's not correct. Here's the answer that I wrote. Can you verify my answer? And it looked and it ran through it and it said, oh, yeah, that's correct.
You're right.
Right. And so the idea here that in a lot of ways, the process, right, isn't about giving it to AI to get the answer. It's about going through the process to take the facts and build the story that gets you to the answer. And so in a lot of cases, when people do this at work, they're so worried they're going to be the one that came up with the wrong answer. And so you have to have a situation where judgment is suspended when you do these exercises, because there may be 10 answers. A great exercise, the exquisite corpse technique, right? Where people all contribute to the building of a single human based on their own part being the only thing they see, is such a great team building exercise, because what you see comes together is a lot of metaphor and literalness in the team members when you see the final product. Oh, somebody used wings for arms instead of actual arms, or somebody, in the case of the one I used in the book, put watches in for eyes. And so you started to have this conversation among people who create this as to what were your choices and what were you communicating. And it opens up people to understanding the way they would have done it may not have been the way someone else did it, but it still worked. Right? It still created the imagery that you needed. And so I think these exercises really help relieve people of judgment, give people the opportunity to explore unconventional things like building a human in parts that don't see each other, and then being comfortable with the compilation process not looking like what you might have thought, but still being interesting. And so I think these exercises really are helpful for teams, because they give people the permission, all right, to navigate the ambiguity without there being a correct and only one correct answer.
Well, Leslie, I just want to say I applaud you for putting together this kind of a great manual, which addresses just things that help elevate the human spirit and human creativity, and then also to provide us with a tool that can help us to connect with our organization and raise them to a higher creative level too. So thank you for doing that.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I really appreciate the things that you picked out. It really showed me that the things I was aiming for were landing, because I think the interviews were really a good touchstone for the content before and the exercises after. And I think you really nailed picking out sort of the themes that I was hoping readers would get. So I really appreciate that.
Great. Leslie, in our show notes, we'll have where they can get the book. It's available on Amazon now and other,
Yeah,
other.
it's shipping now. It is available and it has been released. Today is the official release date, so
Wow,
it's
it's
available
exciting. We're
everywhere.
honored. We're honored to be
Yeah,
interviewing on the big day, and congratulations for that. I know
thanks,
it's a
Steve.
work of passion and love, and you've definitely impacted one person, and I'm sure you're going to impact a ton
Oh,
more.
that's so great. That's so rewarding. It's really why I did it. I felt like the accomplishment was writing the book until I actually started giving the book to people, especially for endorsements. You have to
Yes.
go put your book out there so somebody could write the little quote on the back of the book, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh my God, what if they hate it? And all the people I gave it to don't want to write an endorsement. So
Right.
that's the first moment. But
Yeah.
now that it's out in the world and hearing people tell me about their takeaways or their experience with it, that's actually the part that was the accomplishment, because
Yeah.
that's the punctuation on the book, not getting the book done, but actually having an impact on people's lives. And I'm so grateful that you shared that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So this is Steve Kemp with the People Not Titles podcast. Again, Leslie Grandy, thank you very much for being on our podcast, and we look forward to seeing what else you create in the future.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening to the People Not Titles podcast. We are proudly sponsored by Land Trust Title Services. If you enjoyed the podcast, please hit the like button, please subscribe, and we'd love it if you'd share our podcast with your friends. Thanks a lot.